Hey, welcome everybody to a very special start to the fall Colloquium series. It's great to see you all here. Great to see you in person. Joyce, great to see you too. And thanks for everybody joining online. It's really an exciting and diverse crew as always. It's a special year for us because we'll be celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Colloquium series. So that's a big deal. And we'll be doing that properly, throughout the year, including some special events. But this is a fantastic way to start it, frankly. So I'm just thrilled. Remember that we do have the research series this Wednesday, and I haven't even thought far enough ahead to see who is on tap for the research series. Maybe Angie or Gustavo or Jess. We can look, and we'll remind folks at the end. But I'm looking forward to that. David asked me to remind you guys, though, there is lunch. There's lunch right after this, and there will be the whole term on Mondays. We're trying it out, and there's nibbles on Wednesdays, right before the research series. So come over, enjoy, we'll learn and digest together. So multiple friends. So, and Sonia, thank you so much again for agreeing to moderate, and congrats to our newest provost professor here at IU, Sonia Carly as well. So I'll hand it over for the proper introduction for our distinguished speaker.
Yes, I am so excited to be here. Thank you. And to have the honor of introducing Daniel Matisoff. So Dan is an associate professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology School of Public Policy, where he founded and directs the Sustainable Energy and Environmental Management Program, which I know he has created from scratch and picked up in just a few years, and it is doing very well. So very exciting. He serves as a fellow with the Brooke Byers Institute for Sustainable Systems and is on the advisory board of the Strategic Energy Initiative. He's authored a very large number of articles and has a forthcoming book called Eco Labels, Innovation and Green Market Transformation, Learning to Lead with Cambridge University Press. He has participated in over $5 million of sponsored research through NSF and a variety of other funders. He has a degree in public policy from Indiana University here. I know, I've heard of it. It's pretty awesome. And an economics degree and international relations degree from the University of Pennsylvania. In his free time, Dan enjoys backpacking in the Georgia wilderness, brewing beer, running a lot on trails and the road, and competing in ultimate Frisbee tournaments. And in fact, as an alum of Indiana University, he was also on the ultimate Frisbee team when he was here as a graduate student and competed in college nationals with them in 2007, which I was there just a few years before, so we didn't overlap and meet then, but our worlds did collide in other ways later on. So the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
All right, thank you. And it's great to see some names I recognize up there. How do I get to on this? No.
I can help you out.
So then share screen.
I don't think that's even the right Zoom. So I think we can here we go. There you are. This guy. We're good there. Everybody can see and hear online, is that right? Maybe a thumbs up or a chat just to confirm. And if no one responds, we know there's an issue. There you go. Good. Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks, Bernie. Thanks, Brian.
Is it right that if there are clarifying questions, somebody can interrupt? Is that right? But save the big, meatier, juicier questions for.
That's it.
First, I'd just like to thank you guys for having me here. It's been so great. I went for a jog around campus and lots of familiar memories. Coming into this room, I'm remembering Vincent Ostrom erupting in anger if anybody ever said the government.
Oh,
There's not allowed to say the government. And I just had such great mentorship here from Evan Rehnquist and Lynn Ostrom and John Maxwell. And one more anecdote before I get in. Lynn had to miss my dissertation defense because that was when she won the Nobel Prize. Excused absence, I suppose. All right. So today I'm going to talk about some work I've done over the last number of years and sort of where that's going. And so it's sort of culminated in a book called Eco Labels, Innovation and Green Market Transformation, Learning to Lead. But really, this is also a jumping off point for how we think about market transformation. And given the passing of the Inflation Reduction Act, I think there's some potentially really interesting stuff to talk about.
So.
All right, I can just go through this one, or how do I,
We might need to scroll, which is not gonna work super well. There's a way to do this?
maybe?
Pages.
This is a PDF file or?
PDF, right?
Yeah, so you can.
We might just need to scroll. And that's
All right.
nothing wrong with scroll. It makes it more accurate that
All right,
way. There we go. Oh, yeah, you can signal to us. I'm happy.
You want me to sit over there and scroll for you?
sure.
Or bring it over here? Okay.
All right, so a major challenge of addressing climate change is decarbonizing the built environment. The built environment's responsible for roughly 40% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and it's governed through many layers of governance and many types of jurisdictions. And I had an observation with a colleague that, aside from the fact that we've sort of failed to price carbon at an efficient, a socially efficient level, even if we did, there would still be a lot of other frictions in this market, specifically information frictions and the areas beset by high transaction costs and search costs, information asymmetries, uncertainties that really lead to something that we're going to call the valley of death that we've seen. It appears in the innovation literature. Let's move along. There was this building being built on Georgia Tech's campus. It's called the Candida Building. It's a certified living building. It's net energy positive, net water positive, net waste positive, has attributes of beauty and equity. Lots of great stories. I can give a really nice tour of that building if you're ever down in Atlanta. And it had the stated goal when they built this building to change the way that building and construction was done in the Southeast. I said, well, that's kind of an interesting hypothesis. Maybe we could test that. And in fact, 22 years ago or so, the US Green Building Council released its Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design Eco-Label with a stated goal to make green building widely accessible within 30 years. And so we have a fair bit of data that we can now use to assess whether changing the way building and construction is possible, whether it's happened, and how that occurs. Next slide. So first I'm going to define green market transformation as when nascent energy and environmental technologies become common in the marketplace. And there's this very well-known vast diffusion curve for technology. We use it for policy adoption a lot. And so we know that diffusion exists, but a lot of times the mechanisms are not obvious or are unclear or are unspecified. And how do we shape that curve? This curve could be steeper. It could take a lot longer. There's like no metrics on this axis, right? And so it's sort of a very generic logistic function. And maybe there are some ways that we can accelerate market transformation using a combination of public and private action. Next slide. All right, so where we came to this is from this, again, this point that prices don't solve everything. And so maybe green market transformation can be accelerated through information spillovers. And this all started with some work I was doing on some other voluntary programs, thinking about how norms change and how institutions change over time. And that, there are these spillover effects, the effect of the treated on the untreated, right? This spillover effect that occurs outside of an institution. And so we have a number of different types of policies and programs that lead us to provide information to the market, a positive information externality that maybe we haven't really thought carefully about before, and how that plays a role in market transformation. Next slide. So here's our valley of death. So we have a lot of policies traditionally aimed at R&D and developing new technologies. And those are a technology push, a supply push policies. And then we have commercialization, and we have subsidies and things to accelerate market adoption when a technology is mature, and that's sort of our demand pull policies. But what's in the middle here? And so one thing that might be in the middle is pilot and demonstration projects, but we'll look at a couple others as well. So the leadership, for those not familiar, leadership in energy and environmental design, LEED, is a multi-tier, multifaceted eco-label. So you get points in 5 different categories. And then depending on how many points you get, you move up the tiers. So you get a shinier sticker for getting more points. And what's kind of interesting, it's a discontinuous signal paired with a continuous score, but that's a topic for another day. But it's a really interesting institution. It's got lots of different stakeholders and players involved in it. Let's keep moving on. But we got about 75,000 registrations we're going to use, 1,100 pilot projects. And all this started with an observation that firms tend to adopt these labels to get this marketing signal, and that marketing signal bumps people up. You never bother to get a 39. You just go and get the 40. And that's additionality. And so one of the that we're getting additional investment in innovative energy and environmental technologies because of this marketing signal. And that's leading early adoption in this space. And as I'm going to discuss, provide some positive spillovers to the market. All right, next slide. And it's also a global phenomenon. This is 14 eco certification programs for buildings around the world. And here's our BAS diffusion S-curve. So we have sort of the early stage labels, and then they've upgraded and allowed, they've restarted the race. And so anyway, there's our BAS diffusion curve. Let's keep moving. And all right, so driver 1 is these pilot and demonstration projects, and our red dots are 1,100 pilot projects. The blue dots are the regular projects. It's hard to tell anything from that map, but it's a cool map, so I wanted to show it. But what we find using a triple differences model is that the presence of a pilot project doubles the uptake of LEED, non-pilot LEED buildings in a particular geographic location. And government projects, university projects help facilitate private sector. So we see some spillover from the public sector to the private sector. We see reduction in costs associated with the presence of a pilot project. So we see something like 10% lower times of construction after a pilot project was built. And so it's good. Lots of evidence of information spillovers that help cause the adoption of innovative tech. And we think this can be a virtuous cycle. So you have your early stage adopters that are doing this for that marketing benefit. So you're getting higher quality, and then you have networks that accelerate learning and learning by doing, and that's going on, and that drives costs down, and that begets increased adoption. And over time, we see the mass of the distribution of buildings. This is the histogram of the building scores move out. They're getting greener over time. Interestingly, they're less likely to certify at the thresholds over time. They're more likely to over-comply, which makes me think there's some technology learning going on there. They're sort of learning the value of the actual investments, and that the investments underlying the signal are actually cost effective. Maybe they make your employees happier and more productive. All right, next slide. And so one thing that's interesting, we don't study this formally, but USGBC has been very purposeful about using networks to disseminate information, having partners and a wide set of stakeholders vested in greening the green building industry. Moving along, lots of involvement from lots of different sectors. Keep going. And one thing that we find is that multi-location firms help transfer knowledge. So if like you have a Starbucks in one location that went LEED, you're more likely to then see, and specifically a pilot project LEED building, they're then more likely to build more LEED buildings in other locations. So these multi-location firms might be a way to help disseminate this information. And then we've also see a very supportive supportive policy context in this space. So lots of different jurisdictions have all kinds of different incentives, soft incentives, like you get a zoning bonus, you can go higher with your building if it's a green building, or maybe you get property tax rebates, or and then in a lot of places there are LEED or equivalent mandates, either on just public buildings or sometimes on all buildings for a certain size. Like DC has something like that, Chicago has something like that. And in fact, 70% of the United States lives in some area that has some sort of LEED mandate of one kind or another. So back to our Valley of Death, we can see that there are a number of different policy levers that we have that really the goal is more of an information, or maybe that's not even the goal. Maybe that's some other effect that these policies have, right? And but that's going to help us bridge this valley so that we can get to a point that our demand pull policies, our marginal incentives, changing the cost of a product by a little bit, as the Investment or Inflation Reduction Act intends to do, so that that can actually work. And so, back to Ostrom, a key insight from Lynn was that climate change would really be best addressed through a polycentric approach that acknowledges local governance and local benefits. And this is a big problem for at least the CO2 part of climate change, but we can think about a lot of other benefits that go along with, remember, buildings are multifaceted and they have a lot of attributes that contribute to sustainability. So if we think a little bit more about sustainability rather than just carbon, maybe there are ways that we can leverage lots of different jurisdictions and actors to sort of corral them towards thinking about addressing climate change. And so economics traditionally has had a hard time understanding the spillover effect. You usually use econometrics to control for that. You don't want an effect of the treated on the untreated. That's, your model's misspecified. But we're not going to just adopt price incentives. We need and will adopt information policies, R&D policies. We're going to be funding pilots and demonstrations. So how do these policies interact? And is there an order that they should be adopted? What's the proper order? How hard do we pull on each policy lever? And how do these policy tools interact in different policy and institutional contexts? And so this is sort of where I'll leave it to facilitate some discussion around market transformation and different policy types and tools in institutional contexts.
Andrew, I think that you're first up for a question.
Yes, thank you. Let's see. Okay. Thank you.
Feel free to introduce yourself too, Andrew, if you'd like to, okay?
Sorry, what?
Feel free to introduce yourself if you'd like to as well.
Okay, sure. Yeah, hi. My name is Andrew Berryhill. I'm a fourth year economics PhD student at IU, and I'm in one of the Ostrom PhD fellows for this year. So my question kind of relates to politics and institutional coordination. And essentially, Dr. Matisoff, I was hoping that you could elaborate more on the levels of government that might be implementing some of these policy mixes that you talk about. So for example, it may make more sense for a national government to establish one standard for a new building to be certified as green or energy efficient, for instance, rather than each city establishing its own standard. But with other policies like taxes and some of these pilot programs you were talking about, it's maybe less clear like what level of government is best suited to implement them, and also what level of government will actually tend to and actually will end up implementing them. And I think that this has implications for some trade-offs regarding institutional coordination as well, because like a national government can implement a set of policies even if it's not well suited for them. And the benefit of that would be that it would only have to kind of horizontally coordinate among its own agencies, for example. But if policies were implemented at multiple levels of government, that might theoretically make more sense. Then that would create that extra element of vertical coordination that would have to happen between the different levels of government as well. And so I was wondering if you think that could potentially hinder the complementarities among policies that you mentioned.
So I mean, we can think about the quintessential example of, ideally we want, a carbon tax implemented globally, right? That's sort of the economist's ideal. And if you actually look at what carbon taxes are around the world, you have, $200 a ton in Switzerland and Sweden and zero most other places. So I think the politics certainly is that there's going to be a whole lot of institutional variation around this. Now, if we're thinking about a sector like the building sector, one of the things that was really striking to me is how localized everything really is. Like construction practices don't travel. Technologies are appropriate in certain areas of the country and not in others. And so it isn't probably most efficient to have some national level policy. It's actually something that is quite provincialized. And maybe is more efficient that way, although I don't know. What's kind of interesting to me about this space is the multitude of actors sort of engaging and interacting in this space. So you have your city zoning codes, but they often outsource to LEED. Like they say, all right, you have to use LEED. And then like the newest out of the zone, there's some building codes, essentially then just refer to LEED. Or there's alignment. But some states follow codes that are like 2 years behind or 4 years behind. It's kind of interesting. And then the GSA uses LEED basically as its public procurement policy. So through executive order, we have to procure sustainable buildings. How do we define sustainable? Well, it's got to be LEED certified, or maybe there's another one. And so certainly this sort of both the reality, and maybe I'm ambivalent to whether or not this is the most efficient way of doing it, but certainly the reality is you have lots and lots of different actors in this space and lots of different jurisdictions that have overlapping authority. And so you don't have a government, right? You have governance. And I think that makes it a really interesting space to study. So as far as horizontal, I don't know if I have any explicit thoughts about horizontal coordination versus vertical coordination. But just acknowledging that there's a lot of different levels and there's a lot of different ways that these organizations interact. And one of the things I was thinking about the other day, because institutional investor contacted me. They saw the book is coming out and wanted to just have a discussion. And they were talking about how REITs, real estate investment trusts, are basically mandating that real estate investments are sustainable, right? And so now you have this sort of private governance of this space by investors. And that's kind of an interesting development. Early on, we could show quantitatively that people were certifying sustainable because of other market benefits that you got. You got higher rental rates, higher returns, that kind of stuff. You're signaling to your employees. Everybody likes working in a nice building with daylighting. But one of the things we're seeing now is that sort of it's being demanded by investors, and that's now even without government mandates, it's providing its own sort of set of drivers.
Hi.
Do
So
you want to introduce yourself real quick?
yeah, I'm Joyce Searles, and I'm here as a visiting scholar. It's our second year at the Ostrom Institute workshop. Anyway, the question is, I have looked at LEED particularly about how one starts a standard, and what I would love to hear you address is how, like all the private interests that went into creating LEED. It was like all these guys, got together, got a 501(c) and figured out this is a good way to create something that would be a good marketing tool for everybody and, do the right thing and all that. But it was completely motivated by a profit, opportunity. They saw that if there was something people could focus on, the LEED certification. So we've been looking at that same goal in terms of privacy. Instead of starting with not the government, sorry, government, starting with government and trying to get the public policy version of it. When it starts somewhere in a very organized way, they created this, okay, you have to have the LEED thing. And like you said, then it becomes, the rest of the private market goes, okay, you have to have your LEED certification to, for our REIT. So what I'd love to hear is that interaction, you're talking about it from a policy point of view. What does policy do when they can't, there's no policy to pressure on when you're waiting for sort of a private something to put pressure on?
So I'm not super duper familiar with the origin story of LEED, but my impression was that there was like buy-in from former DOE people and that they got governments or agencies and people in government on board. You had industry on board. So it was a very sort of multilateral initiative. It took a long time. I mean, they, from when they started until when you actually see this taking off was a good decade or so.
It was 93,
yeah, they started in 93, and then you don't really see, I think the first building gets certified in like 2000-ish. And then it starts to take off thereafter, but not really until, I don't know, 2005 or so, you start to really see acceleration.
Well, from my research, basically, the government is nodding along,
Right.
basically, that's all they're doing. They're not actually doing anything, going, oh, this is a good idea. Yeah, sure. If somebody spends the money and organizes this,
I mean, you could imagine the role of government, especially from a more participatory bottom-up policymaking perspective, as a convener that actually, does some of the lifting to bring the stakeholders together, sort of in a negotiated environmental policies paradigm. But certainly, Asim Prakash's work, which really focused on, also coming out of the workshop, this idea of a green club, right? That you do these things that are good for the world and you get a excludable marketing benefit. And so it's that sort of quid pro quo that, you do things that are good for the world and you get to market it. And this is the stamp. One of our contributions here, we think, is that beyond that, some of the way that they put some things that are good for you and good for your employees and good for the community together, these sort of multi-attribute points that they were incentivizing, which I think kind of stumbled across this. I mean, some of it was thought out, but like I talked to one of the guys who was involved in like setting this up, and I don't know, we should do A, B, C, D.
Right.
And so let's do 80%, 60%, 50%, and 40%. And we wanted to be a little harder to get platinum than gold. It did not seem like there was a lot of like deliberate thought in how they set this up, but they sort of stumbled across something that has a lot of really valuable attributes in the sense that it seems to keep incentivizing doing better.
Great. So next we have, I hope I don't butcher this, Pythagoras.
Yeah, hello. Hi from UK. Thank you for the presentation. Very interesting, and it's a pleasure to attend the Ostrom workshop. My research is on fintech, and one of the key problems of cryptocurrencies is energy consumption. So I just wonder, and I would like to hear your thoughts, if there are any policies concerning this area, how we can be more energy efficient in this area, what might be some public policies or policies in general. Thank you.
Well, back to my regular economist hat, get the prices right. If, using renewables in Iceland to mine crypto is way less bad than burning coal to, and if we were pricing coal properly, it would be very, very expensive to mine crypto. I'm not an expert on crypto, but I'm not going to give my opinions on Bitcoin. But I mean, I think that pricing energy right from a crypto perspective, they need to find better ways of doing blockchain that isn't as energy intensive. Is something like a significant portion of the world's energy was used for Bitcoin last year, and that's not good for the world.
Thanks.
Rashid was next.
You're up. I'm,
Oh, okay.
and then Rashid's after you.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you for your paper, and it's been really fun to piece together your narrative from like the presentation and like reading the white paper. And so I have a thought on that. You talked a lot about LEED presentation. I'm not seeing it in your paper at all. And so I think that probably, I'm gonna guess, is that coming? Is that a future?
So where we're going with that is we have a principal agent model that we're looking at adoption of new tech and sort of market transformation where, in the back of our head, the motivating example was the building and construction sector. But basically really simplified, we have information policies and we have price policies. We have consumers that have a preference for the green technology and those that are just more price sensitive. And under sort of what iterations of combinations do these things produce outcomes that are market transformations. That's sort of where we're going with this. The white paper was written as a way to just conceptualize broadly the tools that we have at our disposal. So thinking, here's the case, but now we got to check how generalizable is this? And so when we're generalizing this to create more of a theory around market transformation, it's thinking about different policy tools that can be used and how we employ those in combination. I mean, if you've ever taken policy analysis, you study one policy at a time. And most of us, when we evaluate policy, we evaluate one policy at a time. And so there's this challenge of the real world is messy, and you have infinite combinations of potential policies. So how do we move towards an understanding of how we use lots of different policy tools or policy experiments together and not just individually?
That's so interesting. I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Amy Farini, and I'm actually in the Jacobs School of Music. But I've been an Ostrom Fellow here for a couple of years as well. So no, I've never taken a policy analysis class other than, like the IAD class, but we know that's not your typical, public policy class. That being said, in your presentation, and the paper, so putting them together, it seems like this paper is a paper about the knowledge problem. And how and solving the knowledge problem helps us bridge that valley of death.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very much there. I just don't think that you all see that, which I know when I'm working on a paper, sometimes I miss the most obvious thing. I really do see that. And maybe the policy informs that knowledge, the questions about the knowledge problem. But the valley of death is the core aspect of this problem that you're addressing. And you're saying knowledge and learning help us cross that. That's why your paper's knowledge problem paper, I think. But then there's other details that would really help us to get meaning from your paper, which is, since you are looking at the construction industry, okay, who are the players? Like you said, okay, they're localized people. Okay, well, what does that look like? Are they firms of 20 people? Are they 100 people? The size of the firms, and even the scale of their geographical distribution. Like you said, it doesn't make sense to have, national policy when Florida has different needs because they're dealing with hurricanes, and Oklahoma has tornadoes, and California has earthquakes. So those observations make sense, but then what size of firms are dealing with those questions? And then, you mentioned like Starbucks and other locale companies, chains, we'll call them, to use the colloquial term. Well, is it just chains? Is it more public industries? Like, how many private industries are adopting these? Those details are still missing, and that would make your paper so much richer and with those kinds of thick descriptions.
Yeah. don't know if there's a question there. It's on-
No, just
Suggestion.
observations.
Okay, thank you. Rashid?
Yeah, so actually that's a great end, or I guess a start for where I wanted to inquire. So a little introduction. My name is Rashid Owieli, and I am a Hoosier alumni. I went to IUPUI until 2010, and I wound up in a design program in New York City, and I'm currently in Berlin doing my dissertation. And I've been incorporating some of Ostrom's design principles in my design research. And so a lot of what I've been doing has been around language and being transdisciplinary in my approach, and trying not to get stuck with only one particular disciplinary perspective on language. And so my question to you is, what would be the impact if you changed the frame of your current inquiry from government to governance, and in that way do include the perspective of the firm, the corporation, the business, and the policies that are enacted on that level as well? Because it seems like from my research, I've noticed that there tends to be a discussion around government, which only penetrates so deeply into the lived experience of people. So we sort of do see a limitation in the analysis when the depth of exploration ends at government, because only so many behaviors fall under those regulations. But I think you've chosen a really great industry, which is impacted by different layers of government in a very rigorous way. So there isn't a whole lot of room for design behaviors that aren't controlled under some standard. But I'm still curious if you think that would change some of your analyses if you were to think more governance instead of government.
Yeah, so and this does relate to the previous question. You know, I gave a very brief discussion of 10 years of research. In the book, we do things like do a case. There's a whole chapter that's a case study of the anatomy of a green building project, where we like go in and interview 30 different contractors and talk to them about why they're participating in this project. And they talk about things like, hey, this is a great opportunity to get a leg up with new technology. And we're using this as a loss leader, basically, but it's a high profile project working with Georgia Tech and working with this expansive budget that, because I think that building was around $600 a square foot, typical industry standards around $200 a square foot. So they spent a lot of money doing this green building. The hope being that next time it's $400 when Emory does it up the street, it'll be $400 a square foot instead of $600. The one beforehand, which was in is the Bullitt Center in Seattle, was $1,200 a square foot. So we do address some of these things, and there's a good opportunity to distribute some flyers. But we do talk about some of this. As far as it being governance, no, this is very much, not a government initiative. The policy context that we discuss at the end is sort of an afterthought. Most of what is going on and most of what we're looking at is individual firm behavior choosing to do something new and costly to get this marketing benefit, and then that makes everything more accessible to everybody else. That spillover effect then cascades through the market and creates a virtuous cycle. One of the things that we showed that was kind of interesting is, as you put more green buildings into a market, you might think the market's going to get saturated. There's not enough market for so many Class A office space LEED certified premium buildings. What we actually end up seeing is market momentum. That once you drop a building in, and each additional building increases the probability of the next building being built LEED and at higher levels. And this one of the stories we tell in the book is of these stadiums around the country outdoing each other to be the greenest stadium ever built. That first picture of Mercedes-Benz, I think it's still the only LEED Platinum stadium in the United States. And it's a really interesting story of how, you have this private owner that wanted to do something good for the community. And so there's all this weird social contracting that went into building that stadium, where they also redid all of the water drainage in the neighborhood as sort of a public benefit that sort of then gets paired, and you get points for that under LEED. So like LEED then in this context serves as like a social contract vehicle to help negotiate all these different interests from different stakeholders. And we see that especially with these like the mega projects that get certified. So lots of different interesting stories to be told. You look real carefully at we talk about the diffusion of this new technology called, well, it's not new, it's been in Australia since the 70s, but chill beam HVAC that none of you have probably ever heard about. But Georgia Tech put it in one building, and then in another building, and then in a whole building, and then a bunch of other industries, buildings are copycatting it. And so we see this like adoption of a particular technology cascading through the tech square area of Atlanta.
Oh, that's so cool. Thank you so much for answering the question. One thought as you were speaking was, I wonder if you've heard of the Preston model in the UK.
I'm not familiar with the Preston model.
I think it might be interesting for you to look at it as a comparison to another sort of distribution system, or another set of distribution values that might also be of interest to your work. And again, thank you so much.
Great, Scott, you're up.
Hey, thanks so much. This has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. You mentioned, the vital role that government can play as a facilitator, and a lot of this is governance, as we've been discussing. But with the IRA and just the emphasis on building efficiency, energy efficiency through procurement, perhaps it looks like maybe government will be getting more involved, including in LEED. And I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit about how you see. I know it's early days, but those kind of dynamics playing out, and maybe changing, maybe ramping up the LEED program, et cetera.
Yeah, so certainly, so a few thoughts on this. So one, the IRA mostly seems to be doing marginal price incentives, which is great, but all right, I think it's incomplete, right? And I think that this work helps highlight why it's incomplete. But there is going to be R&D funding. So how does that R&D funding get allocated? Are we building pilot and demonstrations with it? Are we doing basic research? I think certainly one takeaway or one suggestion I would have is to figure out a way to incentivize more pilots and more demonstrations. And one of the things we found in one of these pieces is that one pilot wasn't enough. You needed a lot of them, this iteration. And what was interesting, and so it made me think a little bit about why nuclear has failed, whereas green buildings have succeeded. Like we have if you go out to like Idaho National Labs, it's like a graveyard of experimental nuclear plants. And it's like, why haven't any of these taken off? Well, we've done one pilot for each type of technology and then never again. And what the green building case highlighted is you need iteration. And so how do we, like, is it in the R&D funding? Is it in DOE gets expanded agency funding, but how do we seed more iteration? And this is also one of the things that's interesting to me, is that this is a place where the private sector can really play a role. Universities can build buildings and get donors to help demonstrate technologies and projects. NGOs can get involved. And you see some movement from like the Gates Investment Fund or whatever. Some of these private donors are coming in, trying to act like angel investors into this space. And one of the things they're thinking about focusing on is more pilot and demonstration types of stuff. So I think that one thing the IRA highlights to me, and I don't know exactly what's in some of the R&D pots, is that's only part of the story. We need to also leverage industry and markets and other actors to help move the needle and do it in other ways, because it is mostly just price incentives in the IRA, I think. But there are some others. So the other thing that you mentioned is, well, is it time to sort of double down on LEED? One of the things that was really interesting is once that market got saturated and you sort of reached peak LEED, we say, all right, transformation occurred, but what was cool is they could restart the race. They released LEED 4.0, which has very little uptake. We're sort of at that very bottom. I think the CEO got let go, but it was totally like I could have anticipated that if you do a major update, make it really hard, nobody knows how to do it anymore. And uptake is really slow. And it's, you know, not surprising to me that hasn't LEED 4.0 hasn't picked up a ton of momentum yet, but it might be coming. And so, but yeah, I think it's cool that you can sort of restart the race and that it's different than, it feels like it's more responsive than if it was government policy, right? To have a multi stakeholder organization leading the way, they're a little more flexible potentially than having, you know, government policy. And but if you look at the processes that they establish, it very much looks like the bureaucratic process, right? They have like a notice and comment period, and like they mimicked a lot of the rulemaking process when they set up LEED.
Jess? Cool. All right. This was super interesting, and I have a couple of questions that are kind of related. Hopefully it will come out that way. Okay, so 2 questions. You had your really nice looking Bass curve.
Yeah.
And my understanding of the Bass curve is that like that's the emergent curve that comes from a combination of like a broadcast model and like a diffusion word of mouth model. And my first question is really about whether your data allows you to sort of ascertain the relevant weights there, in part because if your next project is to think about like policy levers, right? Understanding the local relevance of zoning rules vis-a-vis like the broadcasting mechanism, as opposed to the sort of like primary mechanism you've been focusing on, which is the LEED sort of diffusion word of mouth, you know, market pricing mechanism. I'd just be really curious if your data would allow you to look at that. Second question, but I can wait if you would like, or I can.
Yeah, let me answer that one and then we'll do the second one. So we, for so many years, were like trying to figure out if there's a way to leverage, what are they doing under, because this is like, you know, a big scorecard and not all points are created equally. So you have like, to me, one of the divisions we made, you have your pure public good. So improved stormwater management is pure public. And then you have like energy efficiency that's more for yourself. And then there's like, you put solar panels on your building, maybe that's more greenwashing. And so how could we leverage the 100 potential points that you get as part of the LEED label to understand sort of who's doing what and why, and who are they signaling to? Are they signaling to investors or the community or their employees? And the reality that we ran up against is one that it's just really hard to deter, you know, is improved energy efficiency is probably not for the employees, right? That's for ownership. But it became really, and improved stormwater management is clearly for the community. But it was really hard to, you know, a lot of these credits could be categorized in different ways. And then we didn't find very clear patterns in them either based on who is doing what, or, I mean, we found some broad patterns, like if you're in a high water cost area, you're more likely to do the water efficiency stuff. So we saw some basic stuff like that, but there was not, we did not, after 720 t-tests around certification thresholds and for different points, we did not find like really strong patterns of who's doing what that would allow us to understand a little bit more who they're speaking to and sort of what's getting copied. And similar, like, yeah, we can see diffusion and we think it's going, you know, we're lowering prices through information, but there's both supply side effects and demand side effects, and it's hard to tease that out. Yeah, because we don't have, like, I had high hopes of like someday getting all the construction project teams that worked on each project, but that data just doesn't exist.
All right, well, I have a follow-up question for me for later. my other question, so that I don't take up too much time, is it's about whether in the next project or in this, in the book at all, you are engaged at all with the sort of discussions of path dependence and the different processes that might be underlying it. So the difference, potentially a difference between like increasing returns versus positive feedbacks that could help versus like complementarity, like sort of the QWERTY story of like all the different ways that QWERTY got locked in as a keyboard mechanism, right? Like it's both like once that technology got produced, then it was easier to produce it, even though it was like slower than alternative forms. And then you had like institutional complementarities and things like that. And so my question is really whether you're able to differentiate between those kinds of processes that lead to sort of lock-in and this market transformation that you're talking about. I don't know if that's a language that has been particularly fruitful or helpful for you in this actual project, but I'd just be curious if it's something that you've come across.
No, I mean, I haven't thought about that. I think a little bit, there's been a lot of, here's the case of success. How similar or different is this from other cases? And why was this successful? And it's hard to test that, right? And so I can speculate, certainly this multi-tier concept and choose your own adventure approach that allows tailoring, yet also differentiating levels, seems to me to be very important to why this was successful. It allowed continuous improvement, yet still allowed people to do, like you can reach for the stars, but you could still just get certified. And that market segmentation allowed both your sort of industry leaders to play a role, but then other people that just sort of want to tag along. But then didn't give them all the same signal externally. It's differentiated, which I think helps. Whereas in a lot of the other voluntary programs, you're sort of certified or not, and you can't really tell who's walking the walk and who's just talking the talk. And so I think that the multi-tier aspect and the ability of a company to tailor what they're doing and sort of get that marketing signal, I think was a unique feature of LEED that they kind of probably stumbled upon, but ended up being really important in its success.
So we have limited time left. So I'm going to propose we have 4 questions. I'm just going to run through all 4 and then you can figure out how to answer them once in a few minutes. Okay, so we're going to go
Lightning round.
Brian, then Shannon, then Gustavo, then Dan.
Okay, quickly, when you talked about multiple policies, my kind of theoretical question is, what do you see or find as good ways to think about mixing policy instruments? Looking at combinations of institutions when there are synergies and sequences. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was looking up something. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about the relationship between the folks that are choosing to get LEED certification. So you named like university, stadium, which aren't traditionally the most eco-friendly in general, specifically universities with like investing in carbon based industries. And I'm wondering if you've thought about looking at that, like the awkward partitioning that you see in achievement in each, and see if there's relationship between folks that may be doing it or maybe investing in other behaviors that aren't green, and see if those folks are maybe the ones that are walking or talking the talk.
So simple question about the mechanism. Are we talking about the virtue signaling race or a learning by doing story?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as a polycentric system and thinking about how LEED certification might have synergies with, say, SEC reporting requirements.
Yeah, so certainly all kinds of investors are asking for information. There's lots of different reporting mechanisms. I think the SEC is going to standardize some of this. There's probably some efficiencies to be gained by, certainly from the company perspective of having one set of reporting requirements rather than like 30, which is what they're doing now. but you're probably going to lose some dynamism in that, and the fact that we have this more polycentric system right now and some thickness has probably some value that we're probably missing, especially if we go to a more standardized SEC approach. As far as is this some symbolic or substantive, there's plenty of research that shows that LEED buildings are more energy efficient and have all kinds of other stuff. It's hard to get at the motivations, but a lot of this, that you can always do everything but not certified, right? So the certification itself is signaling, right? It is communicating what you did. Now, I think that there is, actually being able to advertise and market what you did and communicate it has value, and that might provide some of the managerial slack to spend a little bit more money and do something special. And so, there's a great case study that we talk a little bit about in the book, but it's of the first LEED building, which was done by Genzyme and or LEED Platinum building. And it was done by Genzyme, and they were talking a lot about their motive. We're a innovative leading company. Our building needs to be an innovative leading building. And they spent a ton of money doing this. And then they made it, them bringing in 0 flush toilets from Europe at $1,000 a piece ended up, nowadays, those are common, right? And so you kind of need that virtuous, what we're suggesting is those virtue signalers, although they're doing it, they're not just pretending, are helping pull the rest of the market along by making it easier. They're providing an information externality, positive information externality that is valuable that we have not really recognized previously. So I think that's one of our contributions. And now I was going back in time and I can't, what was the?
Last one, Brian's is about policy mixture, mixing different instruments, combining them, across them.
Yeah, certainly I think, you can think about these temporally and sort of, where the right time to intervene is, R&D, then pilots and demonstrations, then purchasing. In reality, we know these things aren't as linear or as, so it's going to be messier in practice, but I think it's sort of, you need to do all of the above, and, prices alone are not the, I can use another, are not a panacea, right? More Ostrom is great. And so I think just recognizing, and going back, I had a paper that I wrote when I was here back in 2008, I guess, around policy adoption of energy policies. And you code these policies and there's 30 different kinds of policies. And so how do we think about policy thickness, right? It's there's lots of levels of policies or types of policies all in the same space, yet we really don't have any way to assess them or what combinations work. And so that's sort of where I've been struggling for a number of years trying to think about how to do it. And so now I have this principal agent modeler I'm working with, and that's sort of a first attempt.
Great. Well, thank you. Please join me in thanking.
And we can continue the conversation over lunch. So please hang out. And we have Sonia Amati next Monday. We have, I just looked it up, Colloquium, not